Okay, George, I'm very excited for this. We're going to be talking about Youssouf Fofana. Now, if you've
Who's
ever
that?
listened to if you've ever listened to the Cannon podcast, you'll probably know that George is a massive fan of Youssouf Fofana, and we want to talk about his profile. We have done an entire scouting video on him, so if you want to go check that out, that is in the link below. Similar to what we did for Benjamin Šeško, we looked through clips, stuff that we basically can't sort of show on YouTube. We've actually gone through and broken down clips and stuff. So you want to check that out, you can check that out for free on a 7-day free trial on Patreon. And YouTube members and patrons, thank you so much for supporting us. You can check that out now. But we here, I had to talk about him on YouTube. So Youssouf Fofana, George. Don't know who Fofana is. He is a 25-year-old French midfielder currently playing for Monaco. 32 appearances this season, 4 goals and 4 assists in Ligue 1. And really, I suppose the big appeal of Youssouf Fofana is the fact he is in his last year of the deal, and it sounds like there might be a deal to be done for 20, 25, 30 million euros, which in terms of a quality to cost ratio, we're feeling, are we, after the scouting, this could be
It's
bargain
the
of the summer.
best. It's for me. It is absolutely the bargain of the summer. Look, he's a top 6'8" that I think has been playing at a top level for many years, by the way. And I think his partnerships have changed over the years to show you different sample of the player. A couple years ago he was with Tchouaméni, and his role, and that was more of an 8, and I think that's more of his natural role. We're going to get into it when we briefly discuss his profile, but he is an incredibly vertical player. You will not find a more vertical player than Youssouf Fofana. You will not find potentially a bigger range of pass than Youssouf Fofana, and sometimes to his detriment. He doesn't have a handbrake. It is forward all the time. If there's 10,
you thought Partey didn't have a handbrake.
yeah, if you thought Partey was too vertical, wait till you see Youssouf Fofana. But then afterwards, in terms of his role switching now with more of Kamara, in terms of who he partners with at Monaco most recently, he's a little bit more of the lone 6. And I think if you are going to watch Monaco this year, you will complain that even Erik ten Hag would be proud of the distances they don't cover. So from that perspective, he's left on a little bit of an island, but the way that he's able to cover ground is really remarkable. He's 6'1", if people don't know, a real heavy set kind of player, capable in playing in a multitude of positions and very Partey-esque. If I had to give you a player comparison, it's really annoying not to look past the one man in the midfield we could be looking to move on from than him.
Yeah. You've mentioned him a lot to me, and sort of in the time I've been watching him, I really, really like him. I think the verticality thing is the perfect example. It's there's no better way of saying it than he's an even more vertical Thomas Partey. Every ball is shoulders open, facing play, receive straight through the lines. And to be fair, for what we need as Arsenal fans in terms of breaking down low blocks, in terms of how we actually approach the sort of the final third play, in terms of breaking down mid blocks, etc. As I said to you on the scouting, I can't sit here week after week on the podcast and say I want players who break more lines. I want players who are more vertical, who are more brave in their passing, who do just play those balls through to those intelligent runs with, by the way, who we've spoken about with Martinelli in terms of what this could be for him, what this could be for Saka ahead, sort of runs off the ball, etc., etc. It's really exciting. I will say, if that's at a 10, I'd suggest that maybe needs to notch back to sort of an 8.5, not to completely remove it from his game, but I think it will probably annoy, honestly, some fans, but also probably Arteta. And we also had some concerns about how he approaches duels and sort of aerial duels and stuff. So let's look at the numbers just quickly before we sort of go to the tactical board. These are numbers courtesy of FBref. I'm sure most people know what this is, but if you don't know, this is all of his numbers put in terms of percentile. Obviously, the more green, the better they are, compared to over the last 365 days against top 5 league midfielders. So this is a really, really kind of good comparison. And what we see immediately is he ranks really highly for progressive passes. So in terms of a Partey replacement, if we want to call it that, this is a really, really good option because we know how progressive Partey is. I think the reference we gave was the pass. What am I talking about? The Man City pass, where Partey just goes right straight forward, gets the knockdown from Tomiyasu, and Martinelli scores. And sometimes that is what you need. I think in terms of all of those metrics, all those numbers, progressive passing distance, in terms of pass into the final third, pass into the penalty area, progressive passes, this guy is just go, 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 go. Which can be a concern. It can be too much.
He's too much to the other end for sure, but I mean, in terms of a central progression and attacking zone 14, you're never going to have an issue with that ever with Youssouf Fofana in your team. He's somebody that's going to constantly play that pass forward, and I mean, I think the receiving is really important. It's one of the things that sets him apart. Part of the reason that he is so vertical, by the way, is because he's actually, in my opinion, elite at receiving the ball. And it's not just on the half turn, but it's the way that he's able to consistently open up to the whole area of the pitch. One thing that we haven't quite touched on yet, in terms of the shot creating actions, you're going to see he's an incredibly creative presence, because a lot of it is also not just through passing, but look at his shot, by the way. He is a big threat in terms of a goal threat in higher areas, because he's got a brilliant ability to finish with his weak foot from outside the box. He's willing to take shots on as well. He's very Partey in that aspect. But I mean, instead of hitting rosette, he's actually got some pretty good accuracy with it and good finesse to his finishing. And in terms of him and his dribbles, I think I've seen a lot of questions. Is he more of a dribble first midfielder? I really wouldn't say so. He dribbles in deep buildup and he dribbles to escape pressure. But if you want to escape the opposition, he always does it with a pass. And I mean, his first instinct is, whether that's through a trivela, whether that's through an inside short pass, a through ball, weak foot, strong foot, left, right, up, down, it doesn't matter. He will turn and play it forward. And he will do so with fairly good accuracy as well. The thing is, he can overcomplicate stuff. I would really encourage people to go to the clips, because we really break down some of the instances of the over aggressiveness, but it is a problem. It is something that I think he does too much of. But I think in a team that basically has the handbrake on, you could be asking for a little bravery, and he does that in spades.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you hear a player, 6'1", Monaco, deep lying midfield, that sort of thing, you think of almost the destroyer types. I don't think that's a fair comparison of Fofana. It's not what he is. I think he would be able to play both 6 and 8 in our squad, and this sort of group of numbers is the perfect example of what he does. Brilliant carrying distance, brilliant progressive. And then miscontrols and dispossessed, he's kind of down here. In terms of the way he approaches aerial duels, the way he approaches sort of ground duels, it's not to say he's poor. I think, as you were kind of saying on the clips, it's the second balls that he's after. He's not going to go and attack you and dominate you in the air or dominate you off the first ball.
He's a bit heavy set, isn't he? Yeah. Like he's like, I don't want to be rude, but like he's big boned.
He's a big boy. He's a big boy.
So like when he approaches them, he goes, okay, you know what? I'm not going to compete for the aerial duel. I'm just going to sweep up in the second ball, and I think he's confident in that.
You can see it in the numbers here. Ball recovery is 7.68, in the
crazy
96th percentile, and then aerials 1, he goes down. So that's who he is in terms of on the numbers side of things. We want to come to some questions, because we had some questions from you guys on X and so on and so forth. We also want to come to some comparisons and sort of other players on the market in that sort of area. But first, we want to talk about how he might impact things on the pitch. So we want to look at the tactics board.
Yeah.
It is interesting how you fit players in. Obviously, we're basically going, right, if Partey's coming out, what does Fofana bring us? That, if we bring in a Šeško or if we bring in a Rafael, this all kind of changes and the dynamics change as well. But as a kind of thought experiment, I think we could talk about how Fofana might change things, and specifically the role what he might change in terms of how Ødegaard approaches things. And I want to talk about that.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, let me bring everybody back. And of course, once I select it, I've got my pinwheel of death, but hopefully this works. There we go. So Youssouf Fofana, in typical fashion, let's get everybody back into the normal positions that I think most people would look at, like a simple 4-4-2. And so this could be kind of how we defend in a mid-block. I mean, it's really simple. It's not going to be groundbreaking stuff, but Youssouf Fofana will partner Rice in the same way that,
any concern on that at all in terms of how he might slot in the mid-block?
Absolutely none. I think he'd be brilliant in that. And I mean, I think if anything, he would be a little bit more of an upgrade in terms of, I think lately Thomas Partey has shown an ability to not just lose markers, but physically he's not able to really snap into the tackle as much as he has.
Thomas Partey, is what you're saying.
I hate him with a passion. Okay. But Youssouf Fofana carries that flexibility, and he also carries that symmetry, by the way, with Declan Rice preferring the left-hand side. And with, obviously Thomas Partey preferring the right, there is that dual winner that together, I think they bring the best out of each other. Now, when you start to get a little bit higher up in the pitch, and we'll start to move some players around. And I think when you get in the final third, though, One thing that Youssouf Fofana may do with just his pure passing preference is it allows Declan Rice, of course, to go into his more preferred anchor role potentially, and we'll slot Timber in to join in kind of the two. It gives Odegaard a lot more freedom to float horizontally across the
So you think
pitch.
Fofana would cheat more to the right,
He would.
essentially?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
would absolutely cheat more to the right. And basically, he becomes a passing reference because he can find you weak foot through the ball. He can find Saka in between. He can even cross off to Martinelli brilliantly. And he can himself carry into these zones and finish off his left foot. He's done it brilliantly. You can look at the clips
Yeah,
for
a
that.
couple of
But I
great goals
think,
for France.
right. And I think when Odegaard drops deep, for example, to pick up and build up, he ends up having the flexibility to maybe cheat to the left with a Youssouf Fofana. He's also got an ability to even overload down here. And, Youssouf Fofana can kind of come up top, and you've got Timber be a little bit more high in terms of some of the balancing, of course, but especially if we're looking for that traditional pivot. But for me, what the benefit is with Youssouf Fofana being a little bit higher up the pitch, what you might find is Odegaard's got more of a true 10 mentality. Saka can be inside and can really push up Ben White here. This is the benefit for me because Youssouf Fofana is somebody that's got an ability to cover ground brilliantly. He can be very quick off the ground, and so it allows Martin Odegaard to basically be a lot more in those traditional zone 14, which is what people might describe as kind of that top of the box zone, the most
Or on the
creative
left.
zone, or on the left. You said it, not me.
Finally.
You said it, not me. And so, the thing is with
And by
this,
the way, sorry to cut you off, but look at that rest defense. Like that is, in
yeah.
terms of a counter press and in terms of stability behind the ball, that is nice.
And it's brilliant because you know what I think from a certain level, you've got a Timber that can come out to these zones and an Odegaard that can drop in and find Martinelli through the left if that's something that you'd want to do. But again, he has that freedom to me to really be a true 10 again, personally, because he's got between here, I'd say Timber's more of the underlap carrier. By the way, in the middle third, Fofana won't underlap. He will pass. He can underlap, but he will pass. When it gets to the middle third, Youssouf Fofana's first thought is, how do I break you with my passing? And so I think this is really important, especially if we want to look at Ben White being cheating more higher up the pitch and keeping him there. Youssouf Fofana can join the back three, no problem, and it can keep Declan Rice here, and we can have Yuri and Timber drop in. This is something that I think I see perfectly fine for him to do, and I think he actually doesn't mind doing any of those zones, and he can arrive from deep higher up. He's got that flexibility.
So really, it's more freedom potentially. This is all potential, but it's potentially more freedom for Rice. It's potentially more freedom for Odegaard. It's potentially more freedom for Saka. It's potentially more freedom for White. And by the way, the impact of the freedom on those players will also have a knock-on effect on Havertz and Martinelli if those are the players indeed that we start with.
100%. I think if you had one player that would really love Youssouf Fofana, it would be Martin Odegaard. He doesn't have to do all the roles about coming deep in terms of fixing us in deep build up as much. Youssouf Fofana can carry that role, and it actually allows Martin Odegaard to have a lot more freedom in the final third to really play along the front line, as opposed to consistently being in the right half space. He can receive on the left, he can receive on the right. He has the freedom to maybe do a little bit more work in the final third, and he's got somebody that will find him in those zones instead of being the one to do both.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the final thing on the tactics board here really for me is, if we haven't stressed it enough, I think in those clips you really see it, the lack of angle bias in his passing is so nice off both feet.
Yeah.
The fade he can get on it, he can drive it through you, he can sort of poke it in, he can sort of flick it over the top. There's so many different types of passes in his locker, which I think is really exciting. Okay, so to come on to this, all sounds lovely, and hopefully we've kind of outlined the I'm always worried about every player that we link to is the perfect player and everything's perfect. And I don't feel we're trying to sell anyone a dream. There are issues with this player. Let's be absolutely clear. But the problem is, and I suppose maybe what we're saying, the reason why we're focusing on him is at 20 million euros. When we're looking at Bruno Guimaraes for potentially 100 million, let's say Man City gonna buy him for, or let's speak about other sort of players on the market, as João Neves, who supposedly Benfica are looking at for 100 million or whatever. When we're looking at Mats Weifer, who we might get into a bidding war with United if they pull the fingers
Liverpool.
out, Liverpool, Douglas Luiz, etc. City, Onana, whatever. In terms of quality to price.
Cost. Yeah.
This has got to be one of the best deals. It's got to be. And just to follow on from that, how do you think he does compare to just those names there? So HEIR, Douglas Luiz, Anana, and Joao Neves. I'm sure there's other names, but how do you sort of see him in that pack?
It's tough because, mate, like, I mean, if you're talking from a pure quality of pass perspective, he's up there. He's up there. There's no difference. In fact, I would argue he's a better passer for me than Bruno Guimaraes in the middle third and in the final third. I think Bruno Guimaraes has a lot more tempo in terms of his aggression, ironically, which is one of his weaknesses even. I
More
think
controlled aggression, you think?
more controlled aggression in that aspect. But in terms of passing,
Bruno Guimaraes, sure.
compared to
pitch,
Youssouf Fofana, and compared to Youssouf Fofana, that's the problem, right? Like, Youssouf Fofana is an incredibly aggressive player, and I think that from both an in possession and an out of possession standpoint, we need to rein in the stallion if you were to have him, and you need to put a little bit more limits on him, because I mean, I think from a physical perspective, he's quick across the ground, quicker than most of the people that you mentioned, by the way. But I think there's needs to be a bit more culture in the tackle. There's times typically that he'll just compete and he'll take out the player. I think that he needs to be a little bit more standing in terms of his tackling. He needs to know when to engage. You know, there's times when even if the man is before the ball, he'll go through the man to get the ball. Like, there's a little bit of culture that is needed there. But from a pure passing perspective, Trivella's inside the boot passes, weak foot passes, which again I keep saying, because these players that you've mentioned, by the way, that are brilliant in their own right, they don't, in my opinion, have the same willingness to constantly be vertical as Youssouf Fofana. That is a superpower. If I could describe a superpower for him that sets him apart from everybody else, you're not going to find a more vertical player on the market, but you're also not going to find a more brave player on the market. He is somebody that doesn't care.
To a fault.
To a fault, almost.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually to a fault. I think he does need to recycle a lot more. But again, from a midfield that has lacked central progression at times this season, from a midfield that has struggled to escape pressure in build-up and to access the middle third effectively, from a midfield, by the way, that requires you to be a second ball winner and a dominant second ball winner at that, somebody that can able to be quick across the ground, that can also be a pressing trigger. Youssouf Fofana can do the Declan Rice role at the Community Shield, by the way, higher up the pitch. For the reasons that you love Onana, he can do that role. I still think he's not as competent as Onana, who is a much more leggy shuttler. And I think he's a much more dominant dual winner than a Fofana. But a Fofana is able to get across the ground quick and is able to meet markers. And he is 6'1", and he's a little bit heavy set. He's not going to be poor in duels, but his engaging... I'm calling a little bit heavy, big boned.
He's a big boy. He's a big boy.
He's a big boy. But yes, all in all, mate, I think Joao Neves and Douglas Luiz are people that, many people associate more with the passing profile, I would argue. I think Youssouf Fofana stacks up from a passing perspective to these guys. I think those other guys have probably a little bit more culture, a little bit in terms of their tempo is a little bit more recycled, and it's a little bit more set on controlling the game. Fofana doesn't control the tempo of a game. It's gas pedal on. You bring him on and you look at him to break blocks, to low blocks, mid blocks, balls over the top. He's got it all. But again, if you want him to slow down, if you're in the 89th minute and you are protecting a lead, Youssouf Fofana won't care. He will play the 60-yard pass to release Martinelli. And that's going to annoy fans. And that is a weakness, right? No. Like he's got no, I don't want to say intelligence, but he's got no fear. And in his mind, you have to score. Every time you get the ball, you should be getting the ball in the box. That is his mindset.
The clips are crazy, and not to belabor the point, but it's literally just one touch straight through, which we need to some degree. We do need. I want to finish with a question. Thank you so much for your questions on X. You can follow us at AM on Football. The Cannonpod, you can follow at the Cannonpod. You can follow George and watch him just go back and forth with whoever it is about release clauses or whatever. Sam at Guna Sam S says he's been on the scene for a few years now, played a lot for Monaco and France, yet no team has gone in for him. It reminds me of Amrabat. He looks great and he has decent stats. Why could it be that he's reportedly available for £20 million, giving me red flags? And this is the thing. It feels a little bit cheap, and it is the last year of his deal. I think there's some comments around suggesting that maybe, and by the way, 20 million, it could be got for 20 million, or probably end up being more like 30. there are some comments around, I think, from Fofana himself saying basically he's not going to be signing a new deal. He's pretty much confirmed that, I think, himself. I think he even said it on a TV interview, which is
President
quite
said
brave.
it too.
Yeah, the president said it as well. So he has
He's leaving.
not tanked his value, but to some degree they've
I think he has.
a deal. Well, yeah, maybe he has a deal of kind of a sort of sense of negotiating power. Is there anything else? Are there any red flags? Are we just sensitive as Arsenal fans?
There's a bit. We are sensitive. Look, I think he's also been a victim of basically Tchouaméni leaving first. By the way, like, people forget he was one of the stars of that pivot when he was young, and he was our plan B to Thomas Partey. By the way, if we weren't getting Thomas Partey, we were buying Youssouf Fofana, and so I just think the big teams had ended up buying the midfield partner, and then he got left, and it was kind of a case of, I think a lot of teams look at him and he's good, but I mean, from last year, you were talking 40 million plus. Monaco weren't letting him leave, and Monaco were in trouble last year, and they had spent all their money on Balogun. And so I think it wasn't from a lack of interest. I do think that this vertical mindset and some of the naivety in terms of the duels would mean that a lot of people don't want to build their team around him and may not have selected him from the top elite echelons to be your lone anchor. But I think from a midfield partner perspective, from a squad depth perspective, and when you start to tackle 20 million euros and what that means in this market in terms of the quality and what we're after right now, I really struggle to get a better quality to price ratio than this boy. And I think that if you're looking to move on Thomas Partey, you could effectively do that for zero net spend and really not lose the major passing influence that I think a lot of people want from him.
Yeah, I will say, just finally on the sort of the squad building aspect of this, I think if we lose Partey and get Fofana, I don't think we've regressed, but I don't think we've progressed. Mm-hmm. I think we've lost certain things in some areas and probably
he'll be available. That's one thing we actually haven't said.
Available. Yeah, that's true. But he's missed, I think, since 2019 or 2020, he's missed 3 games. It's 3 games for Monaco, so that he'll actually be on the pitch, which is helpful. Although Partey's record at Atletico told us he'd be on the pitch, so who knows? But yeah, I think that is definitely something to mention. I do feel if that's the only thing we do in midfield, it will probably be a bit of not disappointment, but maybe a missed opportunity. But I don't think it's a bad move in any kind of context, whether we do it or not. Whether we do it in sort of with other players or whatever, that's fine. But in isolation, if you lose Partey, get Fofana, that is a good move. Like, we want to do more, but I think that is a good move. Anything else to say on Fofana before we wrap up?
Yeah, he's you're not allowed to like any other midfielder.
That is true.
And
that's true.
There's
and we've said he's the best player in the world, haven't we?
Yes.
We did say that.
Yes.
There's no other options. And we hate Arsenal. We hate Thomas Partey. I'm pretty sure we said all of that.
And you're a fool if you disagree.
Yes. Yeah. You can't have your own opinion as well. Sorry. So I've got that. Yeah. We are the experts. Yeah.
No, I will say he covers the last thing seriously. Really exciting player. Gives us a lot of things that we lack in midfield, and I think that he would be a unique midfield, something that we don't have. But he doesn't solve for me what are 2 holes in the midfield. There is a 6-8 hole, pressing trigger, somebody that passes from deep, helps us there, and then there's a between the line hole that whether you want to talk about squad management, well, when you're talking about squad management, Mikel using some of the profiles we don't use there, that's a hole, and he won't solve that hole. Whereas I think Douglas Luiz, João Neves, those type of players that are a little bit more 8s are more higher 8s. Like, he's not going to solve the Gundogan profile. That if you want that, he's not that.
Yeah. Lovely stuff. As we say, we've done the scouting, so check that out if you'd like to do that for free on a 7-day free trial on Patreon, or if you're already a patron or YouTube member, thank you so much, and you can watch that now. YouTube members, you get that from the community page. And we'll be back next week. If there's anyone else you want us to scout, anyone else you want us to do player reports on, let us know. Leave it in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching the Cannon podcast. We'll be back later on in the week, back with our main pod on Monday, and the content rolls on, baby. Thanks for listening and watching. Peace.